I want to welcome you to Empowering Writers this afternoon. Our session today is called Beyond Race, How Empowering Writers Can Refine Constructed Response on Your Campus. And we want you to know that we formulated this webinar today because we are hearing a lot of our district staff mention that race is one of the go-to strategies. And what do we do this time of year in order to move forward? And we have several answers for you that we are so excited about sharing and helping your teachers and ultimately helping your students. My name is Jennifer Seaton. I am in North Central Texas. My email is on the screen. I will put it up again at the end of the session, so be sure and jot that down. If you would like to follow up, we could schedule a meeting. That would be perfect. I am the Director of Learning and Development for Empowering Writers. And so as you are coming across these changes in assessment, we are studying and monitoring those as well. So we will begin with our objectives for the afternoon. Today, what we hope to do is to identify important foundational skills required for thinking through an effective response. We know that this falls back on consistent literacy routines. We also know that our listening and thinking and speaking are skills that are going to show up as students are learning to read and write well. So we'll look at that proactive approach and see how really those foundational skills can help students have effective responses in all content areas. We also want to explain how the Empowering Writers resources can equip teachers with easy-to-use lessons and strategies for responding to text. If you need something accessible and you need some explicit instructional tips, this is what we want to share with you. Our resources provide scaffolded instruction that create those layers that allow students to really start with an oral response and then move into a written response. And that's exactly what we're looking for. And then finally, we want to identify opportunities for professional development that will increase teacher confidence and understanding of these new assessment demands. And so between resources and providing training that might help you more easily understand how to use skills and strategies, this is what we want to share. So we'll provide all of this by the end of the session today. First, let's look at how students typically respond. What you see on the screen in the upper left-hand corner is a passage, or what we might reference as a source text. You can see that the title is The Mighty Sled Dog. You can see the layout of the text and what you might preview as a teacher. On the right-hand side, outlined in blue, is the task. And it says this: explain how the author uses text features to help the reader understand information about sled dogs. Be sure to use information from the passage to develop your response. So a simple prompt or task that you've seen that your state may have put out before, where the student is to explain. Here, they're explaining text features for the purposes of how they help the reader understand the information about this particular topic. We can see in the second sentence that there is a reminder that students are to use information from the passage in order to develop their response. So let's analyze this typical student response. Notice outlined here in gold, it says, here are two ways that show the author used text features to help the reader. First, the text shows a title to tell what the article is about. Next, the author used pictures so we can see the sled dogs and what they look like. Those were two ways that show how the author used text features to help readers. Now, some of us might look at this response further or earlier in the year and say, oh, I only wish my students would write a response like that. Multiple sentences, it's on task, it gives examples. This time of the year, you may be leaning towards, okay, they have this. Now, let me see if what I'm doing is working. And so I want to go back to the RACE strategy, the restate, answer, cite, and explain. And let's look at it through this lens to see if students really feel as though they're meeting the demands if they're walking through this particular task. So if we ask ourselves, did the student restate? Let's see. Yes, they did. Notice the student started with, here are 2 ways that show the author used text features to help the reader. That was the task at hand, and they did do that. Did they answer using information from the article? Yes, they did. So let's identify what text features were used, a title to tell what the article is about, as well as a second example, yay, pictures so we can see the sled dogs and what they look like. Very specific. Did they cite? Do they go back to the source text? Again, yes, they did. And where did they do that? They said the text shows and the author used. So they did take us back into the Mighty Sled Dog article. Well, finally, we look at explain. Was it explained? It was explained. You can see the description underlined in orange as well as the wrap up. Those were 2 ways that show how the author used text features to help the readers. Now, we may be able to have a little discussion about the differences in our thinking and how this was assessed and what it looks like and what kind of response it is. But I think that many of us this time of year have this thought, something is still missing. I can't put my finger on it. What is it? And what can I do to give this boost through the rest of this year and after we come back from break in the spring semester? Well, let's look at the difference between a student that has gone through using R.A.C.E strategies and when we've intermingled empowering writers strategies with that structure of R.A.C.E. So you have the example that I just read here at the top. Now let's look at the bottom example. Listen for some of those same things. Restate, answer, cite, explain. And then I also want you to see if you can identify those extra components that push it just a little bit further. The author of The Mighty Sled Dog uses text features to help the reader understand information about sled dogs. From the beginning of the article, we see how the title, The Mighty Sled Dog, introduces the topic of sled dogs. This helps the reader know to be on the lookout for specific information about this strong and helpful animal. 3 headings, a history of helping, the Alaskan Husky, and dog sled racing, provide the main ideas related to the topic. By including a world map with the caption of places sled dogs are used around the world, the reader can identify the specific locations of Alaska and Siberia that are mentioned within the article. Bold-faced words such as serum and mushers acquaint the reader with unfamiliar terms and are usually followed with a definition or description. The photos of these cold-weathered canines give us a peek at the Husky's beauty and strength. The author's use of text features certainly provides visual support for the reader. So teachers, I want you to think about, what did you just hear? What do you see that's a little bit different? Now, we know that length does not always equal quality. We also know that some of us have a restriction on the number of characters or words or lines or spaces, depending on where you're from, that can be utilized. And so if we were to just pull a couple of examples from the body of this paragraph and shortened it just a tad, what still would be the difference? So here we want to fall back on the difference is in those strategies. The difference is the depth and the effectiveness of the response. So once again, let's just look down through those strategies. What did we do? What are we asking students to do when they're restating? Well, of course, they're turning the question into a response. How do they do that? They gather up key words. They frame it up into a main idea sentence. So turning questions into responses, writing a main idea sentence, those might be strategies. But for us, we know teachers need explicit lessons. And these are step-by-step lessons that teachers have access to with empowering writers. If we continue to look down through the strategies, when we answer, we're identifying what are the givens and the variables that lead us to the answers in the source text. If you're not familiar with givens and variables, a given is what you have to write about, what the task is directing you to. I need to write about text features. A variable is the choice that the author makes. So, which evidence or which text features am I going to explain to answer this question? When we cite with R.A.C.E, we want to know that it came directly from the article, the author states, or the reader notices. But when we're citing, it's also very important that our students understand what they're citing. And so first of all, we teach students how to use the detail generating question, what does it look like? So when you have the given, you know what you're supposed to write about. What does it look like in this article? Maybe it's directly there. Sometimes I have to infer, but it doesn't come from my background knowledge. It looks like what this author says. Secondly, we know we need to teach students paraphrasing and citing techniques. And so with R.A.C.E, we do provide them with a few sentence starters. You may have found a few others that stick well with students, but we want a variety of sentence starters. We also want to teach students how to use word reference, which are nearly synonymous words and phrases to use in place of key words. So for example, in this text, we were talking about sled dogs, and strong and powerful animals was something you noticed in the second response. That's another way not to say sled dogs, sled dogs, sled dogs. And then we see with citing, we teach kids how to flip the sentence. So if their sentence structures are the same from sentence to sentence, sometimes we're going to teach them how to rearrange. Now, what you're seeing on the empowering writers side is that there's more than one technique available for students. Again, each of these its own explicit lesson or piece of instruction. And then finally, in explain, we have another detail generating question. Why is it important? Why is this text feature important for the reader to understand what the author is doing? And again, we will have to paraphrase or cite using some of those techniques. So we go back to where does all of this begin in instruction? What does this rely on? And really, that necessary foundational understanding has to do with that initial literacy routine. That point where we're launching in students into reading with author's eyes, identifying the genre, knowing what the purpose is of that genre, and then quickly going to the roadmap of the graphic organizer. So with empowering writers, we use, as you see on the left-hand side of the screen, a narrative writing diamond. And then on the right, for informational text, as well as a variation for opinion and argumentative, we use a pillar. Again, this is kind of the Siri for our students to navigate text. They automatically know that the shape of a narrative is a diamond. The middle is the largest part. It's a single significant event. The author jumps in with the entertaining beginning. We're going to teach strategies for an entertaining beginning so that students see it from the author's standpoint and can more effectively respond. And as you work yourself through that diamond, we teach skills for elaborative detail. We teach skills for suspense, main event, the conclusion, and an extended ending. All the while, because this is taught alongside reading, where do our literary elements fit into this structure so that we can teach it at the same time? Well, if it's not narrative, perhaps it's informational. And so as we follow the predictable pattern of an informational text, we know that there's an introduction, a body, and a conclusion. So we start with the lead and a topic sentence. In the body, the author may have one main idea supported by details. possibly 2 main ideas, sometimes 6 main ideas. So again, this is just a structure, and then wraps it up or sums it up with a conclusion. Now think about, why is this important in response to text? I know where to go and locate the evidence. So from the title forward, as your students are looking at passages and answering questions, they automatically start determining some of these skills. And this is what we call the foundations of literacy. We actually call it the literacy launch. In the beginning of the year, we're going to launch our students into literacy so they have a proactive approach to any text. Yes, in their RLA classrooms, but also these same skills are going to apply in science, in social studies, in math, in the outside world, in any reading that they do, any text encounter. So notice with me in the overlapping section of the Venn diagram what those important foundations are. A lot happens before we get to a written response. So what is that? This is what we're defining now. It is identifying that genre. What's the author's purpose in that genre, and how is it organized? And how do we bring that into visual support for our students? Not something that's vague or unknown, but to pull it in with a graphic organizer that they can use in both reading and in writing. So you see those graphic organizers on the outliers here. Differently than before, now you can see we also are going to pair those with summarizing frameworks. Teaching summary can be challenged, but is it important that our kids can summarize text efficiently before they begin to answer questions? Absolutely. So we follow the framework of a narrative with the story is about, the problem or the experience is, and the problem is solved or the experience concludes when. With an informational text, we're going to summarize each time by identifying what is the topic and what are the main ideas. To take a little bit of a deeper dive, we're going to teach steps for annotation and analysis. Now that we have these graphic organizers, we can see the skills that the author begins to use just at an awareness level. The more we do this, the more routine that it becomes for our students in order to identify these skills. But next, once we have those weeks of literacy launch, teaching that important foundational information, then we move either into narrative instruction or informational instruction, where we teach the skills in isolation. So, for example, when we move into narrative instruction, we teach elaborative detail first. Elaborative detail is really in all other parts of the diamond. But when we do that, we start with an awareness level of, can you identify the critical character, setting, or object within a story? Identifying it. Let's see what the books that we read, what are those things? Then we move to a generative level where we're teaching kids how to use productive questions as authors to generate those skills. Now, what do they still have? The ability that as they're generating those details about a character, setting, or object, they're noticing more intentionally when they read how authors are using those same productive questions and that kind of detailed language. And then as we move into wrapping up about elaborative detail, this one skill, then we're teaching kids how to respond to that. How did the author use the elaboration, and how did that affect you as a reader? And so each time we move to a new skill, whether it be on the narrative side or the informational side, we're working through this process that really sets students up for an effective response, orally and in writing. Now they're learning to do what? They're learning to read with author's eyes. Think about reading with author's eyes. I see text a little bit differently because why? I can generate it. So therefore I can respond to it because I know the moves that an author makes. So whether you're looking at responding to short constructed response, extended constructed response, or literary analysis task, we know that we stand firm in equipping and empowering our students with the skills that they need to have those effective responses. Now, you've been working hard all through the year, or your teachers have if you are a curriculum director, and you know that this kind of progression doesn't necessarily take place overnight. No, it doesn't. It's a lot of hard work, and you've done that. You've done it well up to this point. We know that we're going to move and progress as long as we have consistent practices in place. We're developing assured experiences so that this practice happens on a routine basis. We're developing a common language. And because of this, we have those skills to keep moving students forward all the way through the end of the year. So I love this visual and want to share this with you. It's kind of another way to look at the Venn diagram, but as an equation. So notice at the beginning of the year, we teach annotation and analysis with each genre so that students begin to develop an awareness of text. You might think of this as a 30,000-foot view. They can read with author's eyes, not just when they're in reading language arts, but anytime they look at text. Think about pairing that now with the skills, the individual skills. So we're taking a deep dive into learning how to identify, generate, and respond to, but that generative writing falls into play. And what does this sum up to? Creating more strategic readers and writers. It's a flip side of the coin, okay? I want you to think about how this process is maximizing instructional time. I love this visual here. I think of these two wheels in this student's head. One is a reading wheel, one is a writing wheel. And sometimes those are not what we feel like well greased or moving along. They're not having all of the ideas that we feel like we're equipping them with. And we want to make sure that we have both those reading and writing strategic approaches in place. Can we look at it a little bit differently? Same pieces, yet I want to take out the plus and the equal sign. And I want you to think about the role of assessment with these same components. Think of these links and how they have to stay together. And I want you to determine up to this point, where do you think might be weak links with your instruction? Think about how we've had this shift. The pendulum has swung with some of us, and we have some different requirements for our state. Either maybe it's with your standards or maybe with your assessment. And now, instead of generating and being prompt driven, now it is more responsive and it's source or text based. Some of you have been there for a little while, and some of us are just now joining, but it really makes a lot of sense when we say, oh, we've got to go directly to teaching kids how to respond to text. And so that's tempting for us at times to remove some of the generative writing skills. If we're teaching them how to read, then we jump to teaching them how to respond. But what does that do? That creates a very weak link, and it depends on which link you are missing. So consider, based on what I just said, how does this connection affect instruction? Well, we will always want to fall back on our empowering writers methodology. And this is really defining these skills for our students. We want to set up a common language. We want to set up those assured experiences. And so we really intend to come into our lessons with a whole class approach. This is whole class instruction. Now, don't worry, we're going to have that GRR, that gradual release of responsibility, if you'll follow with me through each of these steps. Think about the gradual release, but also think about the connections between reading and writing that may be missing in that bridge between the two. Notice how in step one, we're introducing and defining the skill through the use of published examples. So when we think about a skill in terms of generative writing, and let's go back to our elaborative detail example, then we think about what is an author doing to provide this visual in my head? Let's take a published author and see what they did. And then I'm going to show you how to replicate that. In constructed response, right now, you might be introducing and defining skills through exemplars. And so you see how a student has responded and what moves they made with a particular part of the response. And then you will move to step number 2. Now, you as the teacher become the author, and we're modeling, we're showing, demonstrating, articulating the thought processes that we have in answering productive questions, in using the language of an author. And it is during this time that a beautiful exchange happens between teacher and class, where students are a part of the process. We may ask some questions that authors would ask themselves. They respond. We are able to respond back to them, to pull some deeper responses. We're charting on our document cameras or on our chart paper. They're seeing what happens when the words come out of our mouths first, and then they hit the page, and what we do with them and how we revise them along the way. And once we get that out and they see it happening, then we move to step number 3, which is the guided practice. And the guided practice says this: what we just modeled, you're going to practice with your partner or with your table group. And you're going to take those same conversations that we just had together as a class model, and you're going to use that dialogue or that language with each other. And so we're prompting each other with productive questions and how could we rephrase that, or what else could we say in place of this word? So essentially what's happening is we're developing students who are better at peer conferencing. They can provide actionable feedback. They know skills, and so they know how to direct their thinking to a deeper level. Well, this leads us into application. At the application level, we begin to see that students internalize these skills. They're able to respond orally in a much different way. They start utilizing those skills when they're writing generatively, and they start recognizing those skills more when they're reading. So application is something that arrives, but sometimes not until they've had that chance to have those conversations about the skill. And that's why you see that asterisk at the bottom of the screen. Oral always precedes written. Writing doesn't mean that we go directly to the pencil. And I think sometimes we realize that that's a foundational step that's missing sometimes as we're trying to get to that product versus walking through the full thinking process. So I want to share with you now, and this is one of the most exciting pieces for some of you. If we look at our response, what's the difference? What are those extra empowering writers strategies that are built into this step-by-step process for approaching response to text? So I'm going to tell you that this is a 9-step process. It seems like a lot, but keep in mind, this is a routine that happens over and over. This particular process is based on responding to one source text. So I want you to think about it in terms of what we just looked at with the Venn diagram. Step 1, when our students are responding to text, is they have to become familiar with the text. They're going to analyze and annotate the text. What do they have to do? They have to look at the title. They have to attach that text to a graphic organizer. They can go through and label the skills that the author used. Basically, annotating it gives them the direction to go find whatever the task is asking them to do. Then you notice in step 2, they're going to fill out the summarizing framework. If I can summarize this text, I probably understand it at a deeper level. Moving into step 3, analyze the prompt for givens and variables. Remember, a given, what do I have to write about? A variable, what choices do I have in how I respond as the author analyzing another author's work? So, am I on topic or on task? Once I do this, I can go look for that specific information. Now we're on step 4. I'm going to highlight the paragraph. And sometimes teachers, it's more than one paragraph or a section where you'll find the information that you need. Because I'm familiar with the text, I know about where to go. I'm starting to zoom in on that answer. And then step 5, what's some specific evidence that I can underline to incorporate into my response? Now that I have my evidence, I know what I'm supposed to write about. I have the evidence. Step 6 says, I'm going to create a pre-writing plan for answering the question. Basically, now I have my own summarizing framework. What do I intend? I have to answer this question, and I'm going to use these details for support. Well, let me show you something. Notice this dotted line between steps 6 and 7. I want to put this on here because we want to be sure and communicate what happens as far as the thinking process and what foundations have to be in place before students actually begin writing the response. 6 steps before students actually begin writing the response. So once we get to that step 7, here's what I want you to see. When we're thinking about a source text and we're thinking about constructed response, we know that this is going to be a couple of sentences. This is perhaps a paragraph. So we know that this is going, even if we're analyzing literary text, a poem, a dramatic excerpt, a short story, or if we're analyzing informational, opinion, or argumentative text, the response comes back in the informational structure. So you recognize now that this is a portion of the pillar. It's one paragraph. We're going to turn the task into a response by coming up with a main idea sentence. All right, so what's the first sentence in our response, and how do we do that? Step 8 is to compose the body of the paragraph. And so this is where students have the skills of paraphrasing, using sentence starters, or maybe they're going to cite their evidence. They might need to go back and revise what they had with word reference or rearranging the words in a sentence using flip the sentence subject. Maybe they need to add in some transitional words and phrases, all skills that authors know. I'm going to get this ready, make sure that it is the fullest that I can make it. And then step 9, you can see we've added on where we had a concluding paragraph. We're going to make sure that they do a wrap up where they write a conclusion statement referencing what the task asked them to do. Now, walking through these steps, I think now when we go back and look at the response that we looked at to begin the session, it's the same response with how the text features help the reader to understand information about sled dogs. You see each of these strategies and the Empowering Writers lessons in play. So walking through this once more, on the right-hand side of the screen, I want to draw your attention to what was explicitly taught. The author of The Mighty Sled Dog uses text features to help the reader understand information about sled dogs. I know I need to use turn the question into the response, and I also know how to write a main idea sentence, and this should be what it looks like. It is complete and it is developed. We see in the body of the paragraph how you have underlined in both blue and green how this answers the task using evidence, but explains it well, using what does it look like and why is it important. What does the title look like? It looks like The Mighty Sled Dog. Why is the title important? Because it introduces the topic of sled dogs. The topic, notice the academic vocabulary used here. And look at the extension. This also helps the reader know to be on the lookout for specific information about this strong and helpful animal. That's a word reference, strong and helpful animal. Then you can see what does it look like and why is it important with the subsequent text features that the author used. Very clearly laid. I know as a student, I'm going to be successful because I've pushed these strategies where they need to go. The paraphrasing, the citing, we can see the sentence starters that are utilized. We can see those word reference. We can see that there are times when our students have chosen to flip the sentence. And then finally, that conclusion statement. Notice how we wrap this up, basically restating what the task asks us to do. But you'll notice one of the skills we're going to teach kids here is definitive words and phrases. Definitive words give that final punch to the response. Certainly, without a doubt. So this response, the author's use of text features certainly provides visual support for the reader. So we might see the difference. Now I want you to see the resource and how it supports this. So we talked a little bit about elaborating with narrative. I'm going to switch gears just a little bit and just show you the table of contents out of the informational guide, also on elaboration, which uses some similar skill sets, but is more specific to informational opinion or argumentative text. So when you look at this table of contents, if you've never seen an Empowering Writers resource before, first of all, you may notice that this is a page. And so we do have printed resources. You also see in the upper right-hand corner what's called the hub, and that is a digital resource. And this particular table of contents does come from the hub because there are some specific key lesson components. Sometimes we have interactive slides that are already ready to go for a specific lesson. For professional development, we have teacher background videos, which are basically short sections of a workshop explaining the skill. It's kind of that just-in-time learning, or what we might say embedded professional development that can happen all year long as you're teaching the lessons. We also have model lesson videos where you can watch somebody else teach this. You can see students and how they respond, the questions that they ask, what the teacher charts. And so that brings a level of comfort to us if we think that maybe we don't have as much confidence as we would like to have. Those are really helpful pieces. There's also some pieces of technology that really enhance the lesson for students. These are what we call our direct-to-student resources that you don't have to build. They're already included with your lessons. Animated lessons. We have virtual field trips. So anytime your students have a reading passage, then we have already put together a way for them to visit the topic or location in a visual format, just a short video. They can hear the language being used before they read the passage. They can see the words defined on the screen, and they have a good concept of the layout of that text before they dive into the text that's included. We also include what are called skill PowerPoints, and these are PowerPoints that are created. So many times as teachers, we're spending a lot of time creating those PowerPoints ourselves to try to give a little flair to our lesson or make it come alive. Those are created. The text is read to the students if you need that option, or if they need to work individually to go through that text. There are student samples included, and sometimes there are card sets. So knowing what's a part of the resource and how it can be helpful in not only teaching and understanding for teachers, but also in terms of time, I want to show you how we move progressively through each skill. This is one skill, elaboration within the informational genre, and how we move from awareness to generative to responsive. So we think about elaborating in informational. Notice the lessons, just okay or much better. Basically, the students are given a choice. Is this okay, or is this one better? And they're on the same topic. The kids just have to choose. They're just identifying. They're at a very low level of blooms just to see if they recognize the skill. Then we teach orally these detail generating questions. What does it look like? Why is it important? So we're using everyday items and allowing students to articulate what they know and how they can describe what they see, what they hear, what they smell, giving a rich description. Once they're able to do that orally, then we're going to go back to text and we're going to ask them to match up. What does it look like? Why is it important with some of those sentences? So at the awareness level, I begin to get comfortable with the language and the skill. Now I want to push that out just a little bit to the generative level. Now let's apply what we did orally here, and let's write some sentences using detail generating questions. As we do this, we begin to see some of the misconceptions with students. Sometimes we see why they don't pick up on an author's language because they don't have the language, or they don't know how vivid the description is to be able to visualize that. We have find the overly general words. We're looking at that misconception. Sometimes the misconception is, oh, I can describe more if I just list more, but lists don't give details. So what do? We're approaching that. And then using the detail generating questions to really go back and revise a paragraph. Well, think about that, teachers. At this point, you're teaching a generative skill. You're teaching kids to go back and revise a paragraph. Do we want them to do that on their constructed and extended responses? Absolutely. We want them to be able to see how they utilize details and explained in full. And then finally, we move to that responsive. And so this has everything you need because now we're using response to text. This lesson itself could be in either category, really. Flipping the sentence subject could be something we need to revise and rearrange. It's also sometimes the way that we go back to our responsive skills, the way that we'll paraphrase or cite information. And then you can see we're now going to reinsert summary here, summarizing in paragraph form because we're picking up important details. So we have reading and summarizing text. We can respond by comparing and contrasting in research simulation task. And an important responsive skill would be paraphrasing or citing, which we call giving the author credit. All along through this scaffold, you're going to have those key components, as you can see labeled up here, that help to support your instruction. They give you not something that's vague. Oh, I should teach this, but I don't know how. I wish I had the how. I know what I'm supposed to do, but I need a little bit more how. This pulls it down to the tangible level. Now, we have this in each skill section for each genre, but your thinking might be, okay, at this time of year, we already have half a year of instruction. Where do we focus? Do we start from the beginning? Our answer to that is yes, you can, because you want to go back and fill in that important foundational information. But if you're short on time, you might want to really hone in on those lessons that are supporting response to text. This is a sample response to text lesson index from our grade 4 all-in-one resource. And what that means is the all-in-one has the literacy launch, narrative instruction, informational and opinion instruction, argumentative, as well as editing and revising. And what this index does is it directs you to those lessons that will be utilized in thinking, in speaking, and in writing an effective response. So these are provided. This gives you a plan of attack per se at this time of year to take what's working well, perhaps for you that was race, and tweak it just a little bit more. I want to go just a little bit deeper. Tell me what that looks like. And that's exactly what you're looking at. So if you took a little bit closer look at a sample lesson plan, I just want to show you this specific one is analyzing assignments for givens and variables. So we are going to start every lesson with a focused objective. Notice this one says students will analyze a task in order to identify given and variable elements necessary for student responses. You can see right up front, we have that embedded professional development. We're going to give you a teacher background on this because if you say, I'm not sure what a given and variable is or how I can explain it really well to students, then this provides the language and the confidence for you to teach that lesson the next day. So some of these are 3 minutes, maybe 5 minutes that just allow you to prepare for the next day's lesson. Then you notice a step-by-step procedure. So we're going to tell you exactly what you can do. We're going to give you some examples. You can use the examples within the procedure, or you can make it your own. You can use this lesson as a prototype, we say sometimes, so that if you're using a different task or you're using a particular source text, you can look at what we've done with this task and how we've guided through the process of analyzing for givens and variables and apply that to other tasks or texts that you want to. So we give a sample task. We give you exactly how to explain it and the verbiage to be able to use. We give the example of what that needs to look like and set up the framework, the summarizing framework for how they would plan this response. This particular one, you've read the story Snow Day. The main character grows and changes as the story unfolds. Write an essay to explain how the main character grows and changes and identify the theme of the story. Be sure to provide evidence to support your ideas. So after walking through the givens and the variables, defining that, and then looking toward this task to pull the results out, it might look something like this. The topic should be the article Snow Day, how the main character grows and changes, and what the theme of the story is. So right inserted in the lesson, we're providing that informational pillar, the visual. Students need to plan this out. And then this lesson continues past this page to where you can see what that setup would be. Not necessarily every time are we writing to the task. Why? Because we're teaching skills. Students need to get comfortable with analyzing givens and variables before they write. So we're going to give several of these to practice. Identify the givens, identify the variables. How would you set this up as a pre-writing plan? Good. Next task, identify the givens, identify the variables. How would you set this up as a pre-writing plan? And you see the process there. This is just one example lesson. Each of those that I showed you earlier, plus all of the other lessons in the guide, would be what you would have as far as teacher resources to be able to support that explicit instruction that we're all searching for at this time of year. So along with this, you have your step-by-step procedure, you have your very specific lesson plans. We also want to provide to you the opportunities for professional development. Coming up in January, on January 31st, also in February, on February 24th, we are holding some virtual workshops. And so this is a 6-hour professional development where we will walk through teaching how to annotate and analyze text, how to respond to informational text the first half of the day, how to respond to narrative or literary text the second half of the day, so that you can be equipped with each of these strategies. If you're interested, we can support by coming on site. Okay, so we can be in person as well. That's something that we definitely want to talk to you about as a district or as a school. And then we also provide an on-demand or recorded session library of this same piece, this 6-hour constructed response. And if you chose to do this, then this package would be available for 14 days to be able to get in that instruction so you could watch it little by little. Art has generously put in the link if you're interested in seeing more of a description of this constructed response workshop and how it could help you and your team. Be sure and click on that. That will take you to our website so that you do have the details of this particular day. I also want to offer up more time in addition to what we have today. We are going to need to wrap up pretty quickly, but I will be able to stay on as long as you want to for questions and answers. You can email me at jseaton@empoweringwriters.com. And we also are going to put a link to my calendar if you would like to schedule a follow-up meeting so we can talk more specifically about supporting your campus or your district. And so we can go back and review any of the information that we had here or be able to really customize that for your specific needs. So thank you so much for your attendance today. It has been a pleasure to share this with you. We have been working with constructed and extended response for the past several years, and so we feel very confident that this is something that can enhance your work, your current strategies. We never want to throw anything away. We just want to tweak everything and make it better, make it more comfortable, make us feel confident in going into the assessment semester. So at this time, thank you for your participation and attendance, and I am going to open it up for any questions that you may have.